Welcome to this Headless Professor video on how to identify the separate pieces in a research report. The first decision you would have to make about any specific item in the report is whether it describes the organisms or something about them. If it describes the organisms, then that would be the subjects of this research. Now, if it is the same throughout the entire sample, then that would be a constant. For example, if we have a study of 6-week-old male rats, we have several constants. One would be the species. They're all rats. One would be gender. They're all males. And one would be age. They're all 6 weeks old. Now, if it is describing something that changes from one subject to another subject, from one organism to another organism, then we're talking about a variable, not a constant. Now, is this variable a measure of the subject's response? If it is a measure of the subject's response in terms of a choice that the subjects make, or an evaluation of the subject's performance, or whether it looks at an attitude that the subject might have about something, then that would be a dependent variable. Now, is this dependent variable an outcome that we want to predict? If so, that is a criterion variable. Now, if it's not a criterion variable that we're trying to predict in the future, then is it being used to predict something else that will occur in the future? If so, then it is a present or past predictor of a future criterion variable. For example, let's take this research from industrial psychology. Suppose we have 43 job applicants. They all took an aptitude test. All the applicants were then hired, and a year or so later, the performance of each worker was measured. Well, the job applicants would be the subjects of this research. The aptitude test scores would be a measure of their performance, and so therefore that would be a dependent variable. And we're going to use that dependent variable as a predictor of something else that's going to happen in the future. Now, since all were hired, the fact that they were hired is a constant. It did not vary from one subject to another subject. The performance of each worker after a year would be another dependent variable, but a criterion variable, a future measure that we're trying to predict now using the predictor variable of the aptitude test scores. Is the variable a measure of the subject's response? Now, if it is not, because it is a measure of something that happened to the subject, then it is an independent variable, independent of the subject's own choice or preference. Now, is that independent variable something happening right now in the subject's current environment? Then it is a stimulus. And is that stimulus being manipulated by the experimenter, for example, by having two separate groups, one being subjected to one level of the stimulus and the other group being subjected to a different level or without the stimulus? If so, then this is a true experiment, a randomized controlled trial. Now, if the stimulus is not being manipulated by the experimenter, if it's just being measured, then the stimulus can still be used as a predictor of the future response. But then we cannot call the research an experiment. Let's take a look at an example coming from consumer behavior. Let's take a look at adults at the beach on a summer day. Let's measure the amount of beer consumed and how warm the day is. The adults at the beach would be the subjects that we are observing. The amount of beer consumed by the end of the day would be the criterion variable. Now, how warm the day is something we can measure right now. And it's not a choice of the subject, it's something that happens to the subjects in their environment. So it would be an independent variable, and in this case, being used as a predictor variable of the outcome, how much beer they end up consuming. Now, if the independent variable is not something happening right now in the subject's environment, is it due to heredity or early childhood? If so, it is an organismic factor, a background variable. It's something that can be measured but not manipulated. Remember, what we manipulate are stimuli, not the subjects, not the organisms. Now, these background factors can be used as predictors of criterion variables. Let's take an example from clinical psychology. Gender is a background factor. Seeking psychotherapy is a choice made by the subject. It is a dependent variable. We know that women are more likely to seek psychotherapy compared to men. Whether or not someone seeks psychotherapy is a dependent variable, and in this case, a criterion variable, an outcome. To say that women are more likely to seek psychotherapy means that female gender can be used as a predictor of seeking psychotherapy. Remember, subjects cannot be manipulated, only variables. Some independent variables that are stimuli can truly be manipulated in an experiment. Dependent variables can only be measured, not manipulated. Background factors can only be measured, not manipulated. Only some stimuli can be manipulated.